All right, our jurors and alternates have returned. Mr. Durst is present with Mr. DeGuerin. Mr. Bailey and Leon Emilius and Lewin are present. At least one of our readers is, oh, there you are. Our readers have returned. Mr. DeGuerin, you may resume. I've got it at page 71, mid-page.
And with permission of the court, with my 80-year-old knees and back screaming at me, I'm going to sit down and read from here.
Yes, I'm giving you permission to do that.
Thank you.
You'll project, won't you?
Yes, sir. So, did you go to your apartment in New York City?
Yes.
This is an apartment with a doorman. Is it a nice apartment?
Yes, sir.
So what happens when you get there? What kind of reception do you get from the people that are there?
Well, first reception was fine until I met my neighbors across the hall.
It's correct, isn't it, that much of living in New York is living in cooperative apartments or high-rises where you have neighbors that use the same elevator and you see frequently?
Very few people have houses.
And were you acquainted with the neighbors that live on the same floor in your apartment?
Yeah, excuse me, all of us. And I think...
Yep. Oh, that needs to be turned so he can read it. Mr. DeGuerin, will you turn the screen for him?
Yeah, it might not have been working.
I think it's stopped working, right?
Was it not working and that's why it was
I
turned?
guess it's not.
Okay, let's test it.
Did it work?
Screen is on, it's just not scrolling.
Yeah.
Shut it off and turn it back on.
Reboot. It's answer to all problems.
I'm gonna get another one going.
Should it be plugged in?
No, it's fine.
So it's working?
Yeah.
All right, you may resume.
Yeah, excuse me, all of us.
Now let me start with the question. And were you acquainted with the neighbors that live on the same floor in your apartment?
Yeah, excuse me, all of us. And I think there were 4 apartments per floor, and we all knew each other by sight. The people right across the hall from me, we had become pretty friendly in the last 5 or 6 years or whatever.
Did you see those folks?
I saw them coming and going, and they certainly were not friendly like they had been in the past.
Well, what kind of attitude did you perceive from these people?
Well, I wasn't really sure at first. After a while, though, I guess I'd been there for close to a week or something. They had a little boy who had used my apartment when they had things on the Hudson River. I had a balcony over the Hudson River, and we had taken turns using it. He had walked my dog a bunch of times, something like that.
Did you see that little boy?
I was coming into the building in the middle of the afternoon, and he must have just come down from the elevator, and I saw him across the lobby and, waved at him. And in a loud little boy voice, he said, "My mommy told me not to talk to you."
How did that make you feel?
Well, there were other people in the lobby. Well, the doorman, concierge. Well, I couldn't leave. I had to go toward the elevator, so I went around the other side.
So what did you think about being able to stay there in your apartment in New York?
I was sort of thinking this lady is very opinionated, that she would tell her 10-year-old son not to talk to me like that. But it made me start getting either concerned or paranoid or looking over my back like that when people are talking about me.
And what did you want to do?
Well, I didn't want to spend a lot of time hanging out in that apartment building, that's for sure.
Now, you had a place in Connecticut also, didn't you? As kind of a commuter, not a commuter, but a place away from New York City?
Yes, what they call a weekend place.
Well, did you consider going there?
I intended to go there on the second weekend after I got back to the city.
What happened about that?
Well, there's a large property around the house that I own. I think I own the entire carriage house of what was once a big estate farm, I guess, originally. And the people who own the house had a number of people who work full-time on their property. When I first moved there, they had invited me over for dinner. And I'd asked if they knew somebody who could take care of my property, my house cleaning and stuff like that, to do lawn things. And they said I should work out something for their caretaker.
Did you do that?
Yes. That's the way we have been going the last couple of years, where I would call before going up there, and they would have my property taken care of.
So you would call from New York, talk to either the people or the caretaker and say, please clean it up, I'll be there, something like that?
Yes.
Well, did you try to do that this time?
Yes.
Tell the jury what the result was.
The lady said I should start making other assignments.
Arrangements. Arrangements.
Arrangements.
Did she say it in a friendly way?
Well, she said it very flatly. Just, leave my caretaker alone, essentially.
Now you still have a place in Northern California and you had a place in San Francisco, right?
Well, I never actually succeeded in moving in the condominium I had in San Francisco. Whenever I had gone there, I stayed in motels. I kept on planning on furnishing the place, but I never got to it.
What did you do after you got this chilly reception at the apartment building? You got the lady in Connecticut who tells you to make other arrangements. What did you decide to do?
Well, I intended to go out to California. Debbie and I were going to spend Christmas together at her house in Bridgehampton that New Year's, like that.
Hold on a second. So we don't confuse the jury. Bridgehampton is on Long Island, right?
Yes, sir.
But you said you also intended to go to California?
Yeah, I thought I was going to go there for a week or 10 days. But the last time I went by, I ended up only going there for 5 or 6, like that.
So what happened when did you make arrangements to go to either San Francisco or Northern California?
Well, I had called the lawyer who was handling the development in San Francisco because there was supposed to be a community board meeting shortly after New Year's for the building permit I was working on. And initially, the architect wanted me to go to the community board meeting, and I called him. I right away sensed that something was different, and I asked him flat out if he had seen the media reports on me. And he said he had. And I just asked him if he thought it was a good idea I go to the community board meeting, and he said it would not be a good idea.
So now San Francisco has given, or at least the contacts that you had in San Francisco, had given you the cold shoulder.
Right. He wanted to get the building permit and did not take my intended help. That was for sure.
You had asked Debbie to marry you on November the 3rd. Had you gotten a marriage license?
We got a marriage license a day or two after I asked her to marry me.
What did you do when you first got back to New York with Debbie?
I said, Debbie, you want to still get married? And she said yes. And we got married.
Did you tell Debbie where you'd been?
No.
Did she question you?
I don't know about question me, but she wanted to know.
Did you tell her?
I did not tell her because I did not want her. What I did not want her to know that I was in Galveston. Because then if something happened with that Janine Pirro lady, actually start charging me with anything, she would be involved.
You mean Debbie might be involved?
Well, then she would know where I was.
Did you talk to Joel Cohen during this period of time in New York?
Oh yes, we met. He was, I don't want to use the word angry, but he said that if he was going a good job representing me, I couldn't ignore his phone calls. And I told him that I hadn't been getting my messages. He sort of didn't believe that. Once I met with him and I told him that I just couldn't sit around and wonder if I picked up the phone, if it would be some bad news or some sort, I definitely didn't want to answer the phone because of all the reporter people who were calling me.
Did you tell Joel Cohen where you'd been?
No, he didn't like that at all.
You and Debbie got married.
Yes, sir.
What kind of wedding did you have?
We went to a rabbi, just the two of us, and we got married.
You've been given a cold shoulder at your apartment. The lady in Connecticut has asked you to make other arrangements. In San Francisco, they don't want you to appear before the community board. What about Northern California? Did you go there?
Yeah, I finally got around to going there. I flew to San Francisco and I flew to Eureka.
Let me stop you right there. We talked briefly about what it takes to get to your place in Northern California. You have to fly to San Francisco and take a commuter airline, is that right?
That's correct.
When did you go to Eureka?
The week of the 17th. I don't really remember which day.
Of December?
Yes, that's correct.
When you, from the San Francisco airport to get on the commuter airline to go to Eureka, tell us what happened.
Well, it's an all-day affair because there's so few flights from San Francisco to Eureka. And Eureka is frequently fogged in. That part of Northern California is extremely foggy and rainy. And at that time, they had just, I think, 4 flights a day. And there were just 2 pilots who would take turns flying back and forth all day. So the few people who would use that airport, you get to know the pilots, if not by name, at least by sight. And we would acknowledge one another. They may carry the baggage onto the plane, then do everything involved in flying. And this pilot I recognized right away. And in the past, we had been sort of chummy. He wasn't chummy on that flight.
What did you think then was going on?
I assumed that he had seen some sort of television show and they had talked about Robert Durst, and he recognized me as the Robert Durst that he knew.
When you got to your destination with the airline, the commuter airline that goes into Eureka, what happened?
Well, they don't have any facilities for long-term parking. So I own a Ford Explorer.
You kept a car out there also?
Yes, I needed a car. I had arranged with a Ford dealer where I bought it. It was a couple miles away, that I would leave my car there when I was out of town.
What happened when you got there?
Well, I would always call them up and they would come and get me and take me back there. And the person who I had arranged this with said in the future I should find some other place to park the car when I was away. It was inconvenient for them to have it there all the time.
Did he say that in a friendly way or not?
Well, it wasn't a friendly way, that's for sure.
So what did you think was going on?
I thought he must have seen one of those TV reports.
And for the jury's understanding, Eureka, California is what size of place?
It's very small. Trinidad is like 600 people. And Eureka must be 7 or 8,000, something like that.
Trinidad is where your
House was, yes.
Well, did you decide you could stay there for a while or not?
I stayed there for the next 3 days or so.
And how did you feel about staying there, knowing that even in Northern California, in this rural area, there were people that were shunning you because of the news?
I just figured every place a television would go, people would recognize me as that Robert Durst.
So what did you do?
Eventually, I flew back to New York, and I had Christmas with Debbie at Bridgehampton.
Now explain to us Bridgehampton in the winter. Is it, Long Island is a resort area and so forth there, but how is it in the winter?
Long Island is a pretty suburban, occupied area, but Bridgehampton is way out on Long Island. A summer place, the beaches, like that. And very few people stay there in the winter.
So did you spend Christmas with Debbie at Bridgehampton?
Yes.
In the next couple of weeks, I want to ask you if on January the 9th, you got some very disturbing news.
Yes.
Tell us about it, what happened on January the 9th.
We were like mad at UCLA in 1965. Susan Berman, even though she was in California and I was in New York, and I never went to Los Angeles. So even though I would go to California, I would not go there to see her. We had seen each other infrequently, but we always stayed in touch by writing and telephone calls and like that. And we were still close. I could talk to her about things. I got 2 voicemail messages.
Who were the voicemail messages from?
Julie Baumgold and Nick Shaven.
Who is Julie Baumgold?
Well, she is a woman, and I knew her from when I was a child. Her parents were very good friends.
And who is Nick Chavin?
He was a guy I knew in New York City very, very well from maybe 1978 until I was leaving the family business in the early 90s.
Is he associated with the Durst organization?
Yes, he did the advertising.
And what was the message?
Both of them left essentially the same messages. That I should go to the LA Times on the internet, that Susan Berman had been murdered over Christmas.
What did you think?
I felt terrible for Susan, and terrible that really my best friend goes way back then, was dead. And I was also, I don't know what the word is. I couldn't understand how the mutual friends we had in Los Angeles couldn't have really told us, because neither Nick nor Susan, Nick nor Julie were both mutual friends of Susan Berman's, knew about it until January the 9th, until 2 weeks later.
2 weeks after her death?
Yeah. I just couldn't understand that nobody had told me anything about it.
What happened next?
Well, I called the people I know in Los Angeles that I know from Susan Berman, and I put that same question to them and told Sir Reeb Kaufman, her adopted son and a couple of her other friends. How could you not tell me? And they all seemed to say, well, they all thought that somebody else had told me.
You mentioned the name Sarah Kaufman, and you said, well, tell us who Sarah Kaufman is.
He is Susan's adopted son.
You talked with him, you talked to several other people, and everybody thought somebody else had told you, right?
Yeah, and the same thing with Julie Baumgold and Nick Shaven.
That news was disturbing enough. Did something else happen soon after that made it turn awfully bad?
That same day, I don't think it was until the evening, was a voicemail from Joel Cohen. I called Joel Cohen back at home. And his first question to me was, is it true that you walked Susan Berman down the aisle at her wedding?
Is that true?
Yes, sir. But I had no idea how, because I'm sure that I hadn't said anything to him about Susan Berman, because, no, you know how.
Let me stop you there for a second. Joel Cohen, the lawyer that the Durst organization chose for you, calls you and asks you if you'd walk Susan Berman down the aisle for her wedding.
And I said, yes, sir.
What happened next?
What happened next? I said I started questioning him like he had been questioning me. Quote, how do you know about Susan Berman? And
His response?
his response was that he was getting calls from reporters that Susan Berman, Robert Durst, good friend, was murdered in San Francisco over Christmas, and Janine Pirro had spoken to the press, and I can't remember the word that he used, but is saying that you are not aiding and abetting or some other legal term for it.
Somehow involved?
Yes. That's not the legal term, but yes.
So Janine Pirro, now you have just learned of the death of your good friend, the murder of your good friend, and shortly after that, Janine Pirro is claiming that you were involved?
Seemingly, Janine Pirro was claiming, yes. That's what I found out. Seemingly, she had spoken to the reporters some other time that day, and that they were reporting this to either Joel Cohen or Mortimer Matz, and that Robert Durst is somehow involved.
And what does that make you want to do?
I guess I had two thoughts. One, what has happened to Susan Berman? I want to find out what this is all about. And I want to get away from this Janine Pirro lady. Felt scared again, or differently, or whatever.
You wanted to run away again.
Yes, sir.
So what did you do?
Well, I spent the rest of, I guess the next couple of weeks I spent at Debbie's house at Bridgehampton. Sarib Kaufman said there was going to be a memorial for Susan Berman on February the 1st at the Writers Guild in Los Angeles. And I decided I would go back to Galveston, fly to Dallas, and go back to Galveston before going to the memorial.
Did you fly to Dallas?
Yes, sir. I rented a car and I drove to Galveston.
In the meantime, did you get some news about the car that you dumped, thinking you would never see it again in Baton Rouge?
I think I didn't get it until I got to Dallas. It was on the voicemail. But yes, the insurance company called with good news that they have recovered my stolen car.
Was that likely good news to you?
Oh no, not really.
Well, were there any arrangements to be made about your stolen car?
Seemingly it had suffered some damage. They would have to repair it, and I could pick it up at the Honda dealer in Baton Rouge. And they gave me an address and stuff like that, and it will be ready after March 1st.
Had you reported your car stolen?
No, sir.
Okay, so now you're in Dallas. You've learned that the car you thought you had gotten rid of was recovered for you. It's going to be ready when?
Sometime after March 1st.
So do you go to Galveston?
Yes. I rented a car and drove to Galveston, sneaked into the apartment, and put on the wig and disguise and the rest of it, and stayed in Galveston for 3 or 4 days. I was liking Galveston. I was hating the wig as much as ever.
And then what did you do?
Well, I think it was on January 30th or the 31st maybe, I went back to Dallas. And I turned in the rental car, and I flew to Los Angeles to go to the memorial on February the 1st.
So now Susan Berman, even though she was murdered Christmas, right before Christmas, they were having a memorial service in February.
February the 1st, yes.
Then you went out there to go to that?
Yes.
Did you go to it?
No, I did not go.
She's your good friend.
Yes, sir.
What happened to keep you from going to her memorial service?
Well, I got out to Los Angeles on the 31st. There was a message on the voicemail from Joel Cohen, who I had not told I was going to the memorial. And he had heard I was going to the memorial, and that there were going to be media all around the Writers Guild, and that it would be a mistake to go. I called up Sarit Kaufman and repeated that to him. And he said he had heard the same thing, that if I went to the memorial, I would be turning the Susan Berman Memorial into a Bobby Durst went to the Susan Berman Memorial story. So the next day, I flew to New York.
Did you confirm that, in fact, reporters had staked out the memorial service?
Oh, it was covered, yes.
Did you explain to Sarah why you didn't go?
Oh, Sarah, I think, felt it would be a mistake that I didn't go. I don't know if he said that, but he was the one who told me that the Susan Berman Memorial was going to turn into the Bobby Durst went to Susan Berman Memorial, and it would be a mistake.
So you flew back from there to New York.
Yeah.
When did you return to Galveston?
I guess I returned. Yeah, I returned in the end of February, the very beginning of March, the end of February. I'm not sure exactly.
Okay, and when you came back to Galveston this time, did you wear the disguise?
No. I decided I was not going to wear the disguise.
Why not?
It was just too uncomfortable. I was not going to be Robert Durst either, though.
So you were going to come back to Galveston. You weren't going to be Dorothy Sanger, the mute woman with the wig, but you were not going to be Bob Durst.
Right.
Did you stay at the apartment?
Yeah.
And did you see Morris Black there?
Yes. We saw each other several times. 3 or 4 or 5 times, coming and going. The second Friday I was there, Friday, March 9th.
Describe for us what happened when you saw Morris Black. You're not wearing the wig. You're in the apartment next door. Did he recognize you?
I don't think he did. He asked me where the woman was who had rented the apartment, and I said I was her friend, and I would be staying in the apartment for a while.
Did he seem to accept that?
Oh, he accepted it. I don't think he knew that I was the woman. I don't think so.
The court, we're going to take a short break now. A recess was taken. The court, you may proceed.
Okay, Bob, when we left off, you're back in Galveston. You don't want to wear the disguise, but you don't want to be Bob Durst. It's early March. Do you see Morris Black?
Well, several times I saw him coming in and out after I arrived in a rented car.
Did you see him in a way that you've become more acquainted with him?
Yes.
What happens? Tell the jury.
Friday, March 9th, I'm watching a business program called Wall Street Week. And I hear a knock at the door, and it's the man that lives next door. Introduces himself, and says that he likes to watch Wall Street Week and asks if he can come in and watch Wall Street Week.
What did you say?
I said yes.
When does this program come on?
7:30 on KUHF.
Now, on KUHF, that's a radio station.
KUHF.
Okay, is that a morning program or an evening program?
7:30 in the evening.
Morris Black comes in and introduces himself and wants to watch television. What do you do?
Well, I said, all right.
So what happened?
Well, he was familiar with the program.
I'll have to get you to either pull that microphone closer or speak up a little bit more because we're having trouble. Maybe adjust your mask a little. That's not in the script.
He was familiar with the program, and the host is Louis Ruckesier, and knew the guy's name. He came over. Ruckhiser, and knew the guy's name. He came over. It's a small apartment. The only other place to sit down than the office chair I had at the table was the bed. So he sat down at the bed, and I asked him to get off the bed, and I would get him either a couple of hard back chairs I had also bought. And I got him on one of the chairs, and he sat down. And I was having a drink, and he asked if he could have a drink, or I offered him a drink, whatever. And we stayed there for the next couple of hours. He talked and talked and talked. And his interests were similar to mine. He liked the business type programs and the news type programs.
Let me stop you there for a second. You mentioned, did you have a TV in your apartment?
Yes.
You mentioned a hardback chair in addition to the office chair.
I think there were 3 or 4 of them and some smaller tables, some kind of a stool that you could open up into steps so you could open the top of the windows. Yeah, there we go. So I got in the chair and he sat down sort of in the middle of the room and we watched TV and drank Jack Daniels.
Was there a little step ladder also?
Yeah, a little stepladder also.
Now, the record hasn't seen what I've done, but I have put a straight back chair and a step ladder. Where would they be placed?
Well, the stepladder was in the corner over there, and the chair would be facing the TV, about where it is.
There was a model, Your Honor, this is not in the script, but there was a model that we were using. Right. And this is a TV?
Yes, sir.
There's some kind of a little camp table in there.
It folds up.
Well, as you and Morris Black watched Wall Street Week, what else did you do?
We drank Jack Daniels, and he talked to me about the apartment, and he had endless complaints about the apartment, or his apartment anyway. And I told him it was a $300 a month apartment. At some point, I said that the only part of the apartment that I found unacceptable, or whatever, was the linoleum in the kitchen and the bathroom. It was all ratty and should have been replaced. So he immediately told me how he had got drop cloths at this hardware store a couple blocks away, and he had, quote unquote, installed them in his kitchen and bathroom.
Did he show them to you?
Yes. He took me next door to his apartment. And my apartment didn't have much furniture in it, but his apartment it was sparse as compared to mine even.
Did he have a television?
He had nothing electric except a microwave, and he kept that unplugged. So there was no television, no radio, no clock, nothing in the apartment other than the microwave. And he would unplug that when he wasn't using it.
Did he have a telephone?
No.
Did you have a telephone?
No.
What were you doing with your cell phone while you were in Galveston?
I never used it until the middle of September, more or less.
Well, as this evening went on and Morris showed you his apartment and he told you about the drop cloth that he had on his floor. He told you about Chalmers. What else did you and Morris do?
We watched television and had some drinks.
What kind of drinks?
Jack Daniels.
How much did you drink?
I don't know.
Did you smoke any marijuana?
No.
As the evening went on, how did Morris act about the programs on television?
Oh, he sort of took over the remote control and was very active in changing the channels and never watched a second of a commercial. It was a little bit disconcerting, but it wasn't... I got used to it. I didn't mind him doing it.
You said he talked a lot. Did he talk to the television?
Oh, yes, he would.
Describe that for the jury.
Well, if a commentator came on and he didn't like what the guy was saying, he would argue with him, yell at him, like that.
You've heard it described as the neighbors upstairs hearing you and Morris Black arguing. Did you and Morris Black argue?
No, we didn't argue.
Well, when Morris was talking to the television, describe it for the jury. Describe his voice. Describe the way in which he argued with the commentator.
Well, he talked loudly all the time. Frequently, I would ask him to lower his voice. It was a small apartment, like that. He would frequently put the television much louder than I wanted it to. And I was endlessly telling him to put the volume down. But, I mean, he was not the only person. I do that now and then. The guy comes on during the Bush-Gore thing and says something, and you think he doesn't mean that. He is not going to do what he says he is going to do. And you holler at him. But he would do that incessantly.
Okay. Well, in the days and weeks and even months to come, from early March all the way through September, do you spend most of the time in Galveston?
I made a couple trips out of Galveston. Well, certainly the end of April. I was here from the end of April right through September, except for 2 brief trips away from Galveston.
Well, let's talk about New Orleans for a second. At some point, you went to New Orleans and rented an apartment from Michael Ogden, dressed in a wig, claiming to be Diane Wynn. How did that come about?
Well, I decided that I needed this. I thought of it as a place of refuge to go to, and New Orleans was a place I considered going when I initially chose Galveston back in November. And since I was going to pick the car up in Baton Rouge, I figured I would just drive the car to New Orleans. So at the end of, I guess actually in early March, I drove to Dallas and gave back the rented car and flew to Baton Rouge, picked up my car at the Honda, and drove to New Orleans.
Okay, so you pick up your car in Baton Rouge, you drive to New Orleans. What did you do there?
Well, at the time, I had always used American Express travel services. So I had them make the plane reservation, to do whatever their favorite hotel was, which at that time was the Royal Orleans. And I drove there and checked into the hotel where I made a reservation at. And I pretty much did exactly the same thing I had done when I'd first come to Galveston.
Did you have the wig with you?
No, I had thrown out the wig and the woman's clothing here in Galveston when I decided I wasn't going to wear it anymore. I had to buy all that stuff again, which I did.
And where did you buy the wig this time?
In downtown New Orleans. A lot easier there than Dallas.
Why do you say that?
Well, there are lots of wig stores, in New Orleans.
Did you buy any wigs, clothes in New Orleans?
Pretty much the same thing, a woman's blouse and a cargo type pants and something to wear over the blouse.
Why did you need this refuge in New Orleans if you were going to live in Galveston, not as Bob Durst, but as a man?
Well, I mean, the whole idea was eventually I would use Bob Durst in Galveston. But if I was here as a man and they called this if Janine Pirro was ever able to, what do they say, indict a ham sandwich or whatever it is, I figured I wouldn't be able to live here in Galveston.
So you rented the apartment in New Orleans.
Yeah.
Do you think that, of course, you heard Mr. Ogden say you didn't fool him, but did you think at the time that you fooled him into did you think at the time that you fooled him into thinking you were a mute woman?
No. When I look back on it, I think I had the wig on backwards. And I don't think I looked like anything.
Why do you think that? Tell us.
I put the wig on in the bathroom and I was going down the elevator of the hotel. I was by myself and it just looked ridiculous. So I turned it around. And now I'm convinced that the way it looked ridiculous was the way it was supposed to look. And when I turned it around, it was on backwards.
So you show up for your meeting with Michael Ogden to rent the apartment and you got a wig on backwards. What happened?
He couldn't care less. He was happy to rent the apartment. He was happy to rent me the apartment.
Did you furnish that apartment?
No.
What did you do? Did you even stay there?
No. I checked out of the Royal Orleans the next day and drove the Honda back here to Galveston.
Well, now you have the Honda that has it registered to Bob Durst in Galveston. What did you do with it? What did you do with it?
Well, I drove it very infrequently. I figured if I drove it, I would get a parking ticket eventually. I didn't want to drive it. I like riding a bicycle. I hardly ever had any need to drive it. I parked it over on 22nd Street and pretty much just left it there.
So you still, even though you're not wearing a disguise and you have the Bob Durst car here, do you have your credit cards or your driver's license or anything else that can identify you as Bob Durst?
No.
There's no warrant for you. The police are not looking for you. Why are you there in Galveston like that?
I could have moved any place and been Bob Durst, and they wouldn't have known me as that Bob Durst from the media. At some point, by the end of April, I had given up. I gave up the Dallas apartment with the intention of buying here.
Well, let's talk about that for a moment. The Dallas apartment you had only been to for a day or so at a time as a stop-off point to come to Galveston. You have to say yes or no.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so when did you give up the Dallas apartment?
At the end of April.
What did you do with the furniture and the clothes and stuff that you had at the Dallas apartment?
I shipped the furniture to my empty condominium in San Francisco, and I took all the clothes, the linen, and stuff that I wanted, and brought it here to Galveston in the Honda.
Okay, so now Morris Black and you have struck up an acquaintance. He showed you his apartment. He's talked about Chalmers. What was Morris Black's, how did he describe Chalmers?
He said it was this great old hardware store, not like the new ones that they build these days, with all the screws and everything are in these little plastic baggies. But they have a wide variety of tools and merchandise, and the tradesmen go there like that.
Did you go to Chalmers with him?
Yes. The next day, after we watched television, he picked me up at around noon. We went to Chalmers, and he showed me the drop cloth, which I brought along with some other things. And I was ready to leave, and he had struck up a conversation with some of the people there. And I wasn't impressed with the hardware store. It was very crowded, and there were long lines at the cash registers and stuff. So, as I was leaving the hardware store, he said he would come over later and install the drop cloth in my kitchen and bathroom.
Did he do that?
Yeah, a couple hours later he did.
By install, what do you mean?
He had cut the bathroom and kitchen and separated by a, I don't know if you have it here. Yes, there it is. Separated by a wall. You had to cut it to make it sort of fit.
The court. All right. We're going to stop now and start tomorrow. We're going to start tomorrow at 9 o'clock. Recess for the day.
We're actually gonna press on here, so. Go a little bit longer.
Bob, yesterday we broke and you had rented the apartment in New Orleans. We had talked briefly about you were giving up the apartment in Dallas. What I want to ask you about is, you told us yesterday that you used marijuana and alcohol on almost a daily basis for most of your life. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
How long has it been since you've had any alcohol or marijuana?
November 30th, 1 year. I guess it would be 1 year, 11 months on October the 30th, next week sometime.
And for the record, we were on the 23rd day of October 2003. Do you recognize that marijuana and alcohol can sometimes cloud your thinking or cloud your recollection?
Oh, yes.
We are roughly, in your testimony, in late March, early April of the year 2001. For that time until September, did you spend all of your time in Galveston or not?
From late March, early April, I guess, I had spent April, not in Galveston, in San Francisco and New York.
The court. Mr. Durst, can you keep your voice up, please?
I'm sorry. I spent the month of April more or less in San Francisco or in New York. And then at the end of April, I came back here to Galveston. I was here until all this happened, except for two brief trips I made away from Galveston.
Okay, and how did you like Galveston?
I liked living here, yes.
Why?
I don't know, it just seems easy and comfortable.
You also told us yesterday, just before we broke, about meeting Morris now as a man and about watching television, drinking Jack Daniels together in the days and weeks to come. What sort of relationship developed between you and Morris?
We became good friends. When I got back here, I drove from New Orleans to here, I guess the middle of March. Until I went away at the end of March, we spent a great deal of time together. We would watch TV, like the morning talk shows, then go out for coffee, usually to the E Street Coffee House and to the Rosenberg Library.
What did you and Morris have in common?
We had a lot in common. Both of us are loners. Neither of us had much of a relationship with our family, either when we were young or grew up, got older.
Let me stop you there. About your relationship with your families, what was your understanding from knowing Morris about his relationship with his family?
I don't know if it was the other ones didn't get along with him. I thought none of the siblings spent much time with any of the other siblings in his family. But in terms of Morris, he had kept in contact primarily, since he was a sibling, his sister-in-law, Trudy Black.
And your understanding of who Trudy Black is or was is what?
His sister-in-law and a little bit with his sister Gladys Black. Gladys Sassaw Black.
He told you about them?
Yes.
But you said that you had in common that you were both alienated from your families. Did your alienation from your families stem from when you were passed over, or did it stem from other things?
I was never close to my siblings, any of them. We were never sociable together. We never did things together. But then when Douglas was finally chosen to lead the business, I both felt relieved, but I also felt that, well, if this was known, and I felt that people were talking about behind my back, I don't know if that was paranoia or not, but that is the way I felt.
So even though you were relieved, did you have other feelings about it also?
Yes, yes. In the back of my mind, I was going to be chosen, and then I was going to quit, but things don't work like that.
Okay, so what else? I stopped you when you were talking about the things you and Morris had in common. You're both loners and both alienated from your families. What else?
We like to do the same sorts of things. We would go to the library. She introduced me to Hastings, that bookstore, CD store over on 61st Street. I'd never heard of it before. When I'm not in Galveston, I would go to a Barnes & Noble or a Borders or whatever. We both liked to watch the same kind of stuff on television. We were both interested in business and news types issues. Both of us enjoyed more standing outside and watching in. Like, we would go to Temple B'nai Israel most Friday nights, but we would hardly ever go in.
Was Morris Jewish?
Yes.
And Temple B'nai Israel, where is it in Galveston?
Just about a mile from the apartment on 30th Street and Avenue 0.
Isn't there a temple that's closer to where your apartment is on 2213 Avenue K?
Yes, yes. Just a block and a half away is the conservative temple. And both of us, our upbringing was closer to the more traditional, which is the conservative branch. But the congregation was just so small. At Flat Israel, we never went in unless there was a bunch of people there. We would feel funny if there was very few people and they knew one another. So at the conservative temple, a block and a half away, we never saw more than a dozen or more people.
Okay, so you had that in common. What else?
Well, we like to go to the various events in town.
Such as?
Well, the art nights, when they had the art nights, whatever was sort of happening, both of us would rather walk if we could than drive. Something I think I learned from being in New York or whatever. I guess that's sort of it.
What about the library?
We went to the library. We both went to the library almost every day, sometimes more than once a day. We both like the internet. We both like to read.
So in the days and weeks to come, did you and Morris fall into kind of a routine?
Yes.
Tell the jury what that routine was like.
I would get up and turn on the TV. That would be the first thing I would do. And watch whatever talk show I happened to be enjoying, whether it was Today or Good Morning America or whatever. He would knock on the door, and I would almost always let him come in. And then later on, we would go to the East Street Coffee House and get coffee, sometimes there or sometimes somewhere else, but that's usually where we went.
The court, you need to speak up, Mr. Durst, please.
I am sorry.
So with this routine, did you sometimes also go to restaurants or to bars?
Yes.
What were some of the restaurants that you went to with Morris?
We didn't go to restaurants frequently. We did frequently go to the Poop Deck Bar.
The Poop Deck?
Yes, the Poop Deck Bar.
Where is that?
It's on the second floor. Let's see. We were on 23rd, so maybe it was on 25th, something like that, and the seawall.
Okay, restaurants?
We didn't go to restaurants much. We liked the Cadillac Bar and Grill. They had a big buffet lunch. We went to that Cactus Cafe or Grill, whatever it is over here on, I think it's on 14th Street. That was pretty much it.
When you went to the Poop Deck, who bought the drinks?
I usually would.
When you went to the Cadillac Bar, who bought food?
I usually would.
When you went to the Cactus Cafe, who bought the food?
I would usually do those type of things.
Did you come to trust Morris Black?
Yes, yes. I was very comfortable with Morris Black. I've always, when I would walk into the apartment, I would always put whatever I was carrying, keys, my money, and glasses and stuff like that, on that little blue table in front of the model. And I never was the least bit concerned that he would take anything, which he never did. I was meticulous in my apartment. He would fix things.
What do you mean he would fix things?
Well, always something little was broke, or whenever you open those big windows in the front, they were these kind of windows, old and wooden, and knock some paint or wood chips fall on the floor, he would clean it up. He spent a lot of time messing with those windows, trying to get them to open and shut.
Let me stop you a second, because the record can't see what you did with your hands. You did an opening motion with your hands. You mean like shutters?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and Morris helped fix those?
Well, he was always kind of doing stuff to them to make them work better. And there was a problem with, I think, either the hot water faucet or cold water faucet. And I went out to Chalmers and bought whatever was needed to fix it.
With his money or your money?
I don't remember.
Well, did there come a time when you gave Morris a key to your apartment?
Yes. At the end of March, before I left, I asked him, I said, if you'd like to watch TV, I will be gone several weeks or a month or so. I will give you an extra key to my apartment. And he was so appreciative. I thought maybe I felt good doing it, and at least for a long time, I never regretted doing it. He kept my apartment absolutely clean and meticulous.
I want you to, as best you can, describe for the jury Morris's reaction when you said to him that you would allow him to have a key to your apartment.
He was just enormously appreciative, very thankful. He said something to the effect that nobody had done something like that for him in years and years and years.
In fact, had you seen Morris interact with other people?
Sure.
To your knowledge, did Morris have any friends in Galveston that you knew of?
No.
When you saw Morris interact with other people, what did you see? What did he do?
He was initially very outgoing and engaged people in conversations, but almost always the conversations were getting to, the other person would just walk away because they got tired of it, or he would get with an argument about something or other.
What kind of arguments were they? Describe, please, for us how Morris acted in these arguments that he would have with people.
Well, most of the time he would make a comment about something, take a position on something. Either the buses were always late, or that person should mow their lawn or something, or other political. And usually whoever he was talking to would walk away. Now and then, when the person didn't see it Morris's way, he would just keep arguing and arguing and arguing. He had to have the last word in, and he would get into these shouting matches.
Let's talk about a couple of incidents that you witnessed. Was there an incident with some Frisbee players on the beach?
That summer one day, we were sitting out on, we would kind of go halfway between Stewart Beach and East Beach. And we were sitting out there, and there were some college kids, or a little bit older, 4 or 5 of them, playing Frisbee. And several times the Frisbee ended up landing near us. And Morris would immediately raise the issue, there's lots of room to play over there. Go over there and play. And I don't know if the kids moved a little ways away or not, but they kept playing Frisbee. And then the next time that the Frisbee ended up near us, got sand over toward where we were or whatever, he jumped up and picked up the Frisbee and ran and threw it into the water.
Now, you talked about these kids that were playing Frisbee. Would you describe them for us, please?
I'm guessing they were either in college or just out of college. They were in their 20s, like that, 4 or 5 athletic-looking guys.
Physically, how did they compare with Morris and his size?
Everyone is bigger than Morris or me.
So what happened when Morris went over and took their Frisbee and threw it into the water?
He was coming back from the water. They surrounded him and were insisting that he go get the Frisbee.
Were you concerned about Morris or these guys doing some harm to him or something happening?
I knew Morris was not going to get the Frisbee, so I ran down to the water and took the Frisbee out of the water and brought it back and gave it to them and said that we would leave them alone. That's what we did.
Was there another incident on the seawall?
Yes.
Would you describe that for us, please?
Almost maybe the same week or so, we were walking on the seawall going east, right near the Flagship Hotel. And Morris walks very, very quickly. Walks faster than anybody I think I have ever seen walk, except for the race walker types. And he would always go walking twice as fast ahead of me and waited. And I must have been talking to myself.
What do you mean?
Well, when I say aggressive talking to myself, waving my hands and making facial expressions and talking to myself loudly enough so that you would be able to hear me from there. And I've told you, I think I said yesterday, that periodically, whenever that would happen to me in the past, I would be staring straight ahead and somebody would take the idea that I was insulting them or saying something to them, whatever. And I would always apologize and diffuse the issue. So all of a sudden, there was a man standing about 4 or 5 feet in front of me. I'm over here, and he wasn't exactly standing in front of me. He was over to my left still, and he was saying something to me like, "What is it you want to say to me?" or something.
Describe the man for us.
Caucasian, very big, sunburn, rather large man.
Bigger than you?
Oh yeah, bigger than me.
Bigger than Morris?
Yes, sir.
When this fellow said to you, "Are you talking to me?" what happened?
Well, just as I started saying to him, "I'm sorry, I was talking to myself. I wasn't talking to you. I don't know who you are." All of a sudden, Morris had come. All of a sudden, Morris ran in between us, went up to the man, and gave him a very big shove.
Actually hit the fellow?
And not hit him, just gave him a big shove back away from me.
And this guy was much bigger than Morris.
Oh yes.
So what happened then?
Well, the man took Morris by just like here, below his shoulders, and started to push him over toward the seawall.
As if you were going to throw him over the seawall?
He was pushing him out of the way, for sure.
So how did it end?
Well, there was a car parked along the seawall, and he had just arrived, or just leaving. The doors were all open, and there was a couple of ladies, and a bunch of kids, mostly girls, I think, and they started screaming. And this man must have sort of stopped and realized what he was doing, walked away.
Did you see other confrontations with Morris and people in the neighborhood, or children, or at the library, things of that nature?
He would tell people what to do. I didn't know who the children were that he was particularly upset with, but I think he pronounced their name Rabago, the neighbor next door. Rabago, whatever it is, Rabago. What they talked about, I think it was their nephew. I didn't know that it was their nephew at the time, but I knew who they were talking about. It was a kid who would do nothing that kids don't do with Morris.
So how would Morris treat that kid?
He would holler at him.
Holler at him?
Yell.
Over there? Excuse me, that's you.
Over there at the library, he was endlessly getting into arguments with people in the library.
Tell us about the librarians you saw.
We heard most of what I knew, the faking of the heart attacks, and he always had some complaint to somebody. Now, he took it as constructive criticism that he was giving the lady that certain books were not filled properly, or that this was out of order. or that was out of order, but the people there were quickly getting sick of the whole thing. The fire hazard thing, he could not get that out of his mind, that there were fire hazards in the library and that people were not correcting it, fixing it. It was dangerous. Thought it was ridiculous.
Had he ever turned that aggression? And I mean when he went up to somebody twice his size and shoved him back, had he ever turned that on you?
No, he hadn't. But when he was shoving the guy, he was protecting me. I mean, I didn't feel like it was negative toward me at all.
How did that big fella feel?
Oh, I think he was shocked that this little old man was pushing him.
Was Morris strong?
Yes, he was strong, or at least a lot stronger than I am. But yes, for a 71-year-old man, a little 71-year-old, he was quite strong.
Was he stout?
Yes.
So now you've seen these perhaps exhibitions of temper, you didn't call it that, and aggression and argumentativeness with Morris. Are you still friendly with him?
We were talking about the summer of 2001?
Yes.
Yes, yes. When he would get into these arguments with people, I mean, not talking about the thing with the frisbee or seawall, but when he would go start arguing, like at the library, I would go to the library with him, and I wouldn't spend any time with him because we would end up getting in lengthy discussions or arguments with somebody or other. And that's not what I wanted to do there. It was the same thing at the other places we went. As soon as he started getting into a lengthy something or other with somebody, I would just tell him I would see him later.
Did you ever go to the store with him?
What?
Ever go to the store with him?
Lots of stores, but are you talking about a specific store?
Yeah, the grocery store.
Oh yeah. We were standing in line and he would be advising the people in front of him and in back of him that what he thought was not the cheapest one or that they could get a better one, that this was a better brand. And people standing in line at the supermarket would start having a conversation with him, but frequently he would end up walking out to the parking lot. He was helping them. They were sick of getting helped. And with the checkout lady, if a tag or everything was not 100% right, he would always bring that to her attention or his attention or her attention, usually.
Let's talk about Hastings. Hastings is a bookstore that has a reading area and so forth. You and Morris would go there?
Frequently.
What was his interest when you went to the Hastings?
We both had varied interests, sort of describe them, business and news, and stuff like that.
Were there any particular magazines that he preferred over others?
Oh, he would read the gun magazines in detail. Walmart, too, had gun magazines. He would like to read the gun magazines.
Would he buy them or just read them?
Well, Hastings has these big, like Barnes and Nobles. There are chairs you could sit around in, tables where you could sit and read. And so I don't ever recall him buying any of the magazines in there.
But he liked gun magazines. Did you and Morris ever have a discussion about guns or gun magazines or his interest?
Well, I don't know how long it was after we met, and I don't know who brought it up, but we were both familiar with guns. We both liked to target shoot. He said he was a merchant marine. They would throw something overboard and shoot at it.
Well, did you have an interest in guns? You don't know, you don't now. You're in jail, you can't. But did you have an interest in guns?
Yes, about the only sport I was ever good at was target sports, archery, and shooting.
Did you have own guns when you and Morris knew each other in the summer of 2001?
after I had both the 9mm revolver, when I first started spending time here, I leased a ranch in Tyler, and I bought a revolver and a pistol, the 9mm pistol that I was arrested with here, and one of the 2 revolvers that I was arrested with in Pennsylvania. And I had them in Dallas.
Let me stop you right there. You said, when I first started living here, we were in Galveston. You mean Galveston or you mean Texas?
No, I mean, when I first started spending time in Texas in the early 90s. I'm sorry, I don't remember what I said.
Okay. You mentioned that you had a ranch or some property in Tyler.
I had leased a farm, yes,
Okay, what for?
for camping and target shooting.
And already in evidence here before the jury are records from a gun store in Tyler, which you bought a 9mm and a .38 revolver, correct?
Correct.
And there's another .38 revolver that you bought, I believe, in Dallas, Texas. And those records are in here, correct?
Yes, that was in 2001, the beginning of the year.
Okay. Did you ever apply for a handgun license, or in Texas it's called a concealed carry permit?
I started the application process, I guess late in 2000s, there was a lot of hype about for the first time they were going to be able to make guns out of titanium, and they would be very light. So I ordered a titanium .38 caliber revolver. That was the revolver I was arrested with in Pennsylvania. And that was more or less the same time that the handgun permits, the concealed carry, whatever it's called, started becoming available. So I applied for the permit, and I actually went through the application process up until taking the one-day course. And when I got halfway through the one-day course, I got bored with the whole thing and left.
All right, that's enough. Yes, yes, it is 4:31, sorry I ran a little over. I want to let you know now that will not be in session on Monday, July the 12th. Okay, so you will have a longer weekend, but we will be, we'll try to make the most of tomorrow, Thursday. We'll be trying to begin right at 9 o'clock. Do not converse among yourselves or with anyone else on any subject connected with this case. Do not form or express any opinion on the case. We'll see you tomorrow night.